Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission is always to take these complex worlds, arts, history, science, distill that essential knowledge from the sources, and really give you the full context, but, without the information overload.
And today we're diving into someone who's just fascinatingly complex, contradictory even. One of the 19th century's most brilliant figures, Hilaire Germain Edgar Degas.
Better known, of course, as Edgar Degas.
Exactly. And we hit this central paradox right away, don't we? You look in any art history book, Degas is right there, key founder of Impressionism. He was in 7 of the 8 independent shows between, 1874 and 1886.
And this is the kicker, if you'd actually called him an impressionist to his face.
Oh, he would not have liked that.
No. Deeply offended. He absolutely rejected the term. He preferred, realist, or maybe even more pointedly, a classical artist painting modern life. He really was a walking contradiction.
Absolutely. And that's our goal today, isn't it? To get past that simple label, the ballet painter. We need to uncover the difficult, sophisticated, technically brilliant artist who somehow bridged that huge gap between Renaissance draftsmanship and, the radical, fleeting subjects of modern Paris.
How did he fuse that classical rigor with, say, laundresses or jockeys? That's the question.
It is, and we've got a deep stack of sources here, covering everything, really. His early ambitions, wanting to be a history painter, then the financial crisis that sort of pushed him into modernity, his compositional innovations, which were groundbreaking.
And we also had to touch on the controversies. His personality, his politics, they were thorny, to say the least.
Definitely. So by the end of this deep dive, you should have a really thorough, nuanced picture of this pivotal figure in 19th century art.
Okay, so to understand that rigor in Degas' art, we really have to look at his upbringing.
Right.
That sounds quite rigorous itself.
It was. He was born Hilaire Germain Edgar Degas, 1834, Paris. Moderately wealthy family. His father, Augustin Degas, was a banker. Pretty prominent.
And his mother, Celestine Mousson Degas, she had interesting roots. Creole from New Orleans.
That's right. Her family had settled there decades earlier. And there's a small detail the sources mention, but it feels telling. As an adult, he dropped the aristocratic Degas spelling.
Just became Degas. Simpler.
And that little change, dropping the dead, it feels quite symbolic. Maybe moving away from that inherited aristocracy, identifying more as a man of the new professional age.
Whereas his brother René stuck with the more grandiose Degas.
Exactly. René refused to make that change. So this early choice, it kind of mirrors his later rejection of, say, academic art for modern subjects. It's an interesting parallel.
Life wasn't entirely smooth, though. His mother died when he was only 13.
Yes, a huge loss. So the main influences after that were his father, who was highly cultured, and interestingly, a set of unmarried uncles.
And his father had very traditional expectations for him, career-wise. Law school at the University of Paris. That was the plan after he graduated from the Lycée Louis-le-Grand in 1853.
A very prestigious school. But Degas, he wasn't feeling the law career. Applied very little effort, apparently.
And pivoted almost immediately to art.
Pretty much. Registered as a copyist in the Louvre. That tells you something right there. He was serious. He wanted the foundation, the techniques the old masters had. He wasn't looking for shortcuts.
And then came that really pivotal moment, the encounter with Ingres, Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, in 1855, the titan of neoclassicism.
A figure Degas absolutely revered. You can see why. Ingres represented the highest standards of drawing, of classical precision.
And Ingres gave him that crucial piece of advice.
The famous line, "Draw lines, young man, and still more lines, both from life and from memory, and you will become a good artist." That sums up Degas' entire artistic ethos, really. Something he never abandoned.
Never. Even when painting dancers or jockeys, that emphasis on line, on the drawing underneath, it's always there. It's what fundamentally separates him from someone like Monet, right?
Absolutely. Monet was all about color, light, atmosphere. Degas was structure first, line first. Ingres' advice led him to thrive under Louis Lamothe at the École des Beaux-Arts, who followed that same style.
And that classical foundation got cemented during his big trip to Italy. 3 years, 1856 to 1859.
Yeah, and this wasn't just tourism. He was there to study. Michelangelo, Raphael, Titian. But even then, his way of copying was, unconventional, already showing his unique eye.
How so? You'd think copying Raphael means copying the whole thing.
Not necessarily for Degas. The sources say he'd often focus on specific bits that grabbed him, like a secondary figure way in the background, or just a single head from a group.
Interesting. So he's treating that detail almost like a mini portrait.
Exactly. Using the old masters, not just for technique, but to sharpen his eye for individual psychology, isolating those little moments of human intensity.
Okay, that makes sense then. Why his first big ambition was to be a history painter. That was the top tier in the French Academy.
The highest goal. And his early works show it. Things like Alexander and Bucephalus, the daughter of Jephthah, Semiramis building Babylon around 1860, all aimed at that grand tradition.
But the work that really signaled where he was heading, the blend of technique and psychology, was the Bellelli family. Started in Italy around 1858.
Yes, intended for the Salon, the big official exhibition. But it wasn't history. It was this powerful contemporary portrait of his aunt, uncle, and their two daughters.
And when you look at it, the psychological tension is just, wow. The sources really highlight this. It's not just a formal picture. What makes it so poignant?
Well, it's the spacing, isn't it? The way the figures are grouped, but also so isolated. The uncle, Gennaro Bellelli, he's standing apart, back slightly turned, looks quite distant.
And the aunt, Laure.
She's in black, very upright, severe almost. You feel this deep melancholy, this tension, this emotional distance from her husband. And the two girls, they connect the composition, but they seem very formal, restrained.
So he's using that classical, meticulous draftsmanship.
To expose the uncomfortable emotional reality of this mid-19th century family. It's that blend of classical skill and modern psychological subject matter that's so groundbreaking.
He finally did exhibit at the Salon in 1865, but it was with a history painting, Scene of War of the Middle Ages.
And it barely got noticed. Seems the establishment wasn't quite ready for what he was about to unleash.
So that lack of success with history painting, maybe that was the push he needed.
It seems like it. After that 1865 Salon, he pretty much stopped trying those classical or historical narratives.
Right, because his next submission, 1866, Scene from the Steeplechase. The Fallen Jockey, that's a total pivot, isn't it?
Absolutely definitive. Contemporary subject matter. Racehorses, jockeys, the spectacle of modern Paris. And this commitment to the now was definitely influenced by his friendship with Manet.
Edouard Manet. They met a couple of years earlier, possibly copying Velázquez in the Louvre.
That's the story, yeah. But the real catalyst, the thing that really forced him to paint for a living, wasn't just artistic choice. It was a series of pretty major shocks, financial, personal, starting around the early 1870s.
Okay, what happened first?
Well, the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, he enlisted in the National Guard.
And it was during rifle training, wasn't it, that they discovered his eyesight problem?
Exactly, defective eyesight. It became a lifelong worry, progressively getting worse. And this is crucial because, as we'll talk about, it pushed him towards certain mediums later on, maybe even contributed to his isolation.
After the war, there's the famous trip to New Orleans in 1872.
Yes, visiting his mother's family, his Creole relatives. His uncle Michel Misson lived there on Esplanade Avenue. And this trip produced one of his most distinctive works, a cotton office in New Orleans.
Which just this incredibly detailed, complex interior scene, a real snapshot of American business life through his relatives. And remarkably, the sources point out this was the only painting of his life bought by a museum during his lifetime.
Incredible, isn't it? The museum in Pau bought it. It really underscores how, well, precarious his financial situation was about to become. He wasn't exactly a commercial success yet.
And that precariousness became reality when he got back to Paris. His father died in 1873.
And the aftermath was catastrophic. It turned out his brother René had run up enormous business debts, bad banking decisions. The family name, which Degas valued highly, was on the line.
Reputation meant everything.
It did. So Degas, driven by this, strong sense of family honor, took charge. He sold his house, sold his inherited collection of old master art, basically liquidated assets to pay off René's debts.
Wow. So overnight, the formerly comfortable artist is forced to rely entirely on selling his own work.
For the first time in his life, yes. Completely reliant on art sales. And it's an amazing historical footnote. The sources are very clear that the decade, starting right then, 1874, fueled by this sudden, intense financial need, is precisely when he produced a huge amount of his greatest work.
Pressure makes diamonds, I guess.
Or masterpieces in this case. And this financial pressure lined up perfectly with his growing disillusionment with the official Salon. They weren't really accepting his modernizing work anyway.
So he threw his lot in with the independent group, the ones who became known as the Impressionists.
He did. He was instrumental in organizing their exhibitions, showed his work in 7 out of the 8 shows.
Which brings us right back to that core contradiction. He's participating, organizing, but fundamentally disagreeing with their whole philosophy.
Absolutely. He had total disdain for their signature thing, painting on plein air, outdoors. He thought it was sloppy, intellectually shallow.
That famous quote about wanting the government to use birdshot on landscape painters?
So telling, isn't it? It just highlights how different his own studio practice was. He wasn't chasing sunsets.
No, the total opposite. Working indoors, using memory, sketches, models who posed again and again.
And increasingly photography. He insisted, and this is a key quote, "No art was ever less spontaneous than mine. What I do is the result of reflection and of the study of the great masters. Modern subject, classical method."
And his personality didn't help smooth things over within the group either, did it? He was argumentative.
Constantly, arguing with the core landscape guys like Monet, and he caused friction by insisting they include artists who weren't really Impressionists at all, like the satirist Forain or the genre painter Raffaelli.
So he wanted a broader church, but they felt it diluted the brand, so to speak.
Pretty much. That insistence on including others, that rancor, it definitely contributed to the group finally falling apart after the last show in 1886. Degas was critical to their start, but also, well, a difficult collaborator who helped push them to the end.
Okay, so regardless of the label impressionist, realist, whatever the technical skill is, just undeniable. Once he focused on modern life, he was seen as this supreme draftsman. And the sources really emphasize his ability to capture motion.
He really was a visual sociologist of movement, wasn't he? Whether it's the effort of a woman washing, the blur of a horse race, or the discipline of a dancer, he understood anatomy under stress.
Comes right back to that Ingres advice, the importance of line and structure.
Exactly. That deep classical understanding of the figure is what let him capture a fleeting pose and make it look completely natural, completely convincing.
And his style wasn't just about movement. His compositions were revolutionary. He started breaking the old framing rules, using things like awkward cropping, unusual viewpoints.
He was capturing what we might call the accidental framing of modern life, like looking through a window or catching something out of the corner of your eye. Think about Place de la Concorde from 1875.
Right, it feels like a snapshot.
Yeah.
Figures cut off by the edge of the canvas, unbalanced. It creates this real sense of movement, of a moment caught in time.
It really does, and it connects directly to the rise of photography, doesn't it? That instantaneous quality cameras offered.
But it wasn't just photography influencing him, was it? Japanese prints, too.
Oh, massively. Ukiyo prints were flooding Paris then. He loved their compositional tricks, the flat planes of color, figures pushed to the side, dramatic diagonals, those high vantage points that flatten everything out.
The orchestra at the opera, around 1870, that seems to pull all these ideas together. It's a portrait, but also a genre scene, and the viewpoint is just odd.
Brilliantly odd. The subject is the opera house, this professional world, but he shows it from the perspective of, like, a distracted audience member. His friend, the bassoonist Désiré Dihau, is there, but he's just one guy in the pit.
And the dancers on stage are cut off.
Severely. You just see their legs, the bottom of their tooties. He's less interested in the star performers and more in the whole environment, how your eye scans across the scene, how we consume spectacle in the modern city.
It's like an immersive viewpoint, almost cinematic.
It really is. It reinforces that Degas's subject was often the experience of modern life itself, seen through these deliberately, almost arbitrary-seeming frames.
Something else that defines his later work especially is this idea of the unfinished. You see incredibly detailed bits right next to areas that look barely sketched.
Yeah, that's a complex one. He did often blame his failing eyesight after 1870, said he couldn't maintain the fine detail.
But maybe that wasn't the whole story.
Probably not. He also admitted he had this reluctance to just stop working on something. He apparently said he preferred to begin 100 things and not finish one of them.
He was notoriously unwilling to call a painting done.
For him, finished maybe implied there was nothing more to discover or fix. The process of looking, adjusting, refining that was continuous.
So once that financial pressure hit in the 1870s, his subjects shifted very deliberately towards women at work. Milliners, laundresses, and of course, dancers.
These weren't romantic depictions, though. They were driven partly by economics. Dancers especially sold well, and they eventually made up more than half his entire output.
But he didn't paint them like glamorous stars on stage.
Rarely. Mostly backstage, in rehearsal rooms, stretching, exhausted, tying a shoe, adjusting a strap. He focused on their status as professionals, doing a tough job.
The sheer grind behind the performance, the labor involved. What about the milliners and laundresses?
The Milliner series, Women Making Hats, that's often seen as him reflecting on his own art. You know, the milliner carefully arranging ribbons and fabrics, just like Degas, meticulously arranged elements in his paintings, both skilled workers manipulating materials.
And the laundresses.
They allowed him to study bodies under physical strain, bending, stretching, pressing heavy irons, the reality of working-class female labor.
Then later, his subjects shift again, becoming much more intimate. Women bathing, drying themselves, combing their hair, like in the tub.
Right. And it's in these late news, ironically, that his classical drawing starts to give way a bit more to the color techniques he supposedly disliked in the Impressionists.
How so?
Well, the strict definition of form relaxes. The underlying structure is still rigorous, classic Degas, but the color becomes much more expressive, more abstract almost. Backgrounds dissolve into pure texture and hue. It's a fascinating late-career synthesis, really. His love of line finally reconciling with that modern obsession with color.
And that late move towards expressive color, it was helped along by him moving beyond just oil paint, right? Especially into pastel. His eyesight must have played a role there, too.
It seems very likely pastel allowed for bolder strokes, maybe less demanding on failing vision than fine oil work. And by the late 1870s, he wasn't just using pastel, he was an absolute master of it.
It wasn't just like chalk drawings, though, was it?
No, not at all. It's important to realize he applied pastel, this dry medium, in really complex layers and textures. He'd build up these dense surfaces, sometimes using fixative or even water to bind the layers. He could get a richness and depth that really rivaled oil paint.
So pastel was the perfect solution for him in a way. It let him keep that focus on drawing the Ingres line.
But also embrace the vibrant, expressive color that modern art was exploring. You see it beautifully in things like Blue Dancers from 1897. It's a perfect fusion.
Beyond pastel, he was also really into printmaking. Monotypes, specifically. He made hundreds.
Around 300, yeah. Mainly mid-1870s to mid-80s, then again in the early 90s. He was fascinated by these reproductive processes.
Can you just quickly explain what a monotype is for anyone unfamiliar?
Sure. Monotype means single print. Basically, you paint or draw directly onto a smooth plate, usually metal, with ink. Then you run it through a press onto paper.
So you only get one good print.
Usually just one strong one, maybe a second, weaker ghost print. Because the ink is applied directly and often wiped away to create highlights, the image is basically destroyed in the printing. It blurs the line between drawing and printmaking. Degas loved that quality.
And he often worked back into them.
Frequently reworked the printed image with pastel, just doubling down on that mixed media approach he favored.
His exploration of technology didn't end there either. Photography became a real passion later on in the late 1880s.
A serious passion, not just snapshots. He staged elaborate photo shoots, often photographing his friends like Renoir and Mallarmé under dramatic lamplight. Very controlled compositions.
And he used photos as reference material.
Extensively. Photos of dancers, nudes, they fed directly back into his drawings and paintings. It just reinforces again how much his work was studio-based, thought out, not spontaneous plein air stuff.
Okay, now we have to tackle the big public controversy of his career. The sculpture. The Little Dancer of 14 Years. Yeah. 1881, the only one he ever showed publicly.
And it was designed to provoke, wasn't it? It wasn't traditional bronze or marble, it was wax, nearly life-size, and mixed media realism pushed to the extreme.
Real hair, real cloth tutus, satin ribbons.
Exactly. It was hyper-realistic, and the reaction was, well, mostly hostile.
Critics called it appalling ugliness. They couldn't handle the realism.
They struggled with it. The combination of traditional sculpture technique with real, everyday materials, she looked too real, too common, maybe. Not the idealized form they expected from sculpture.
But not everyone hated it. Huysmans, the critic, saw its importance.
J.K. Huysmans, yes. A key naturalist critic. He got it immediately. Said Degas had revolutionized the traditions of sculpture, which arguably he had.
And Degas himself clearly valued sculpture highly. He said, drawing is a way of thinking, modeling another. Put it on the same level intellectually.
He did. Yet, even though he went on to make about 150 more wax sculptures over the years, he kept them all private, hidden away in his studio.
Which leads us straight into that really tricky posthumous bronze controversy. After he died in 1917, they found all these waxes, many damaged.
Right. And his heirs wanted to preserve this hidden part of his work. They consulted a founder, Adrien Hébrard.
And Hébrard decided some could be cast.
He deemed 74 of the waxes stable enough to cast in bronze, and he oversaw that casting process between 1919 and 1936. This is why almost all the Degas bronzes you see in museums today, apart from that original wax Little Dancer, are posthumous casts. They're called surmoulages.
What does sumolages mean exactly? Why is that term important?
It's crucial. It means they are casts made from a mold that might not have been taken directly from Degas's original wax, but possibly from an intermediate plaster cast or even another bronze copy. So while they represent his original forms, they were cast years after his death without his supervision.
Raising questions about accuracy, surface detail, his final intentions, especially since he never chose to cast them in bronze himself.
Precisely. And the whole thing got even more complicated in 2004. Suddenly, this new group of 73 plaster casts surfaced. They looked very similar to the original waxes.
Another layer of complexity. What happened then?
Bronzes were then cast from these new plasters, and it just ignited a huge controversy. Are these plasters legitimate intermediate steps Degas made? Or are they later, maybe unauthorized copies? Where did they come from?
And the reaction from scholars.
Tells you everything. Most major Degas experts just decline to comment, refuse to get drawn into this really charged, high-stakes debate about authenticity. It just shows how difficult it is to manage the legacy of an artist like Degas, who kept so much hidden, so much unfinished.
Moving from his complicated art to his complicated life. Degas the man sounds, well, difficult, secretive, argumentative.
Notoriously so. He lived a very outwardly simple, uneventful life. He had this belief, quite stark really, that the artist must live alone and his private life must remain unknown.
He really cultivated that image, didn't he? The misanthropic bachelor. George Moore calling him an old curmudgeon sounds about right from the sources.
Seems fair. Known for his wit, but a wit that could easily turn cruel. And while he started out moving in, vaguely left-leaning Republican circles,
Signs of prejudice started showing up early.
they did. There's that anecdote, maybe minor but telling, of him firing a model just because he found out she was Protestant.
And this prejudice seemed to escalate later, particularly his anti-Semitism. Scholars even link it to some of his paintings.
Yes, specifically the 1879 work, Portraits at the Stock Exchange. Modern experts widely see anti-Semitic sentiment in it. It depicts the Jewish banker, Ernest May.
How so? What do they point to?
Well, they argue the way Degas depicts May's facial features, particularly the exaggerated nose and his posture, which seems sort of overly eager, almost grasping. They say it closely mirrors the visual tropes used in anti-Semitic cartoons and publications that were common in Paris then.
That's really important context. It takes it beyond just personal views and shows it potentially reflected in the artwork itself, maybe a turning point in his politics.
And the real breaking point, the thing that solidified these views publicly, was the Dreyfus Affair, that huge political crisis that just tore France apart in the 1890s and early 1900s.
Alfred Dreyfus, the Jewish army captain falsely accused of treason. It split the country. Dreyfusards versus anti-Dreyfusards.
And Degas was vehemently anti-Dreyfusard.
Fiercely so, the sources say. And this stance really amplified his anti-Semitism.
It did, with devastating personal results. He systematically broke ties with all his Jewish friends, publicly disowned friendships with Jewish artists he'd known before. This argumentative, rigid nature just led to profound isolation.
One by one, friends just couldn't take it anymore.
Exactly. Renoir's comment is just heartbreaking, isn't it? What a creature he was, that Degas. All his friends had to leave him. I was one of the last to go, but even I couldn't stay till the end.
It really underscores the tragedy. A man with such deep psychological insight in his paintings seemed incapable of maintaining basic human connection in his own life.
It's a stark contrast. Yet, despite all this difficulty, his professional life did involve some incredibly important, if ultimately complex, partnerships. Mary Cassatt stands out.
The American painter. Their connection seemed immediate.
It did. Degas invited her to show with the Impressionists in 1877. They had a lot in common: affluent backgrounds, fiercely independent spirits, neither ever married, and crucially, a shared dedication to figure painting, trying to keep it relevant against the rising tide of landscape.
They were often seen studying together at the Louvre.
And their partnership went deep into the studio, technically. Degas made these really innovative prints of Cassatt, looking at art, experimenting with process.
And she studied printmaking with him directly.
Right there in his studio, using his press, between 1879 and 1880. She also posed for him. She's in his Millinery series. And importantly, she was instrumental in helping him sell his work in America. That provided vital income for him after his family's financial mess.
But as seems to be the pattern with Degas, the collaboration eventually fractured.
Abruptly, the technical side ended when he suddenly pulled out of a prints journal they were planning together.
And the personal relationship suffered too.
The Dreyfus Affair again? It created an unbridgeable gap. Cassatt was strongly pro-Dreyfus, totally opposed to his anti-Dreyfusard position.
There's that telling story about the portrait he painted of her, Mary Cassatt, seated, holding cards.
Yes, Cassatt eventually sold it, and she said, quite forcefully, she didn't want people to know she'd posed for it because she felt it made her look like a repugnant person.
Wow. Speaks volumes about the emotional toll of being subjected to Degas's intense, maybe unforgiving psychological gaze.
It really does. But what's fascinating is, despite that rift, despite her feelings about that portrait, the sources confirm they kept visiting each other right up until his death in 1917.
So the professional respect, maybe some deeper bond, managed to survive the political and personal clashes.
It seems so. Beyond Cassatt, he was also important for Suzanne Valadon. He bought her first drawings, taught her soft ground etching.
And we have to mention Manet again. Their rivalry, their dynamic, was key in pushing Degas towards contemporary scenes. That relationship is still generating major exhibitions even now.
Absolutely. And although Degas didn't have formal students in the traditional sense, his influence was huge. His methods, the line, the viewpoints, the study of movement, they profoundly affected younger artists. Jean-Louis Forain, Walter Sickert, Cassatt herself, and maybe most significantly, Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec.
Toulouse-Lautrec really carried that Degas gaze into the next generation, didn't he?
He absolutely did. Into the cabarets and brothels of Montmartre, #outro.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, Edgar Degas really resists any simple box, doesn't he? He's just defined by these powerful contradictions.
He really is. You've got the reluctant modernist, a founder of the Impressionist shows who hated the name, insisted he was a classical academic artist, who just happened to paint modern life.
You've got the meticulous draftsman, following Ingres, using that incredible skill to show the reality of working women, the tired laundress, the disciplined dancer, capturing those fleeting, almost random moments of Paris.
And then there's the man, misanthropic, demanding privacy, whose cruel wit and rigid politics drove friends away. Yet this is the artist revered for creating some of the most profound, psychologically complex portraits ever made, exposing the inner lives, the isolation of the people he observed.
His lasting importance, it seems, lies in that unique synthesis, taking the highest technical standards of the old masters
And applying them with this disruptive modern viewpoint, influenced by photography by Japanese prints. He really was the bridge between, say, 15th century tradition and the 20th century way of seeing.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider. Degas believed, famously, that a painter needed no personal life. It led him to deep solitude and, sadly, to prejudice. He pushed people away.
So the question is, did that self-imposed isolation, that maybe necessary distance and difficult detachment, did it actually give him the unique perspective he needed? Was it required to capture that profound, often uncomfortable psychological isolation, that raw truth we see in his greatest work?
It's a compelling question to think about as you look again at the work of this brilliant, difficult, utterly contradictory artist.